Mr. Sampanthan is the current leader of the opposition in Sri Lanka and the leader of the Tamil National Alliance, TNA. Mr. Sampanthan has devoted his entire career towards fighting for and protecting the human rights of the Tamil people of Sri Lanka. There are several grievances the Tamil people of Sri Lanka have, such as discrimination of Tamil youth from government employment, displacement of civilians, lack of housing, continued occupation of land by the military, and detention of political prisoners. Among the Tamils living in the north and east and those in the diaspora, it is the common belief that there has not been any progress under the Sirisena government as it pertains to addressing the grievances of the Tamil people. However, Mr. Sampanthan, you have stated that there has been some progress made. What progress do you believe has been achieved under the Sirisena government thus far?
Well, you see, primarily we observe a change in attitude and approach on the part of the Sirisena government as compared to the government that prevailed under Rajapaksa. The Rajapaksa government was determined to continue to do harm to the Tamil people, take their lands away, not assist them in any way to resettle and recommence their lives. There was a great deal of military and state interference with the lives of people. People were not safe. The white man culture was very prominent. Even our members of parliament were assassinated. With Joseph Paraj Singh, Mr. Ravi Raj, and many human rights activists and even journalists in the country were killed. They came by their death. That was an era in which the rule of law did not prevail. Human rights had no place. The independence of the judiciary was under attack. People did not feel free. People all the time felt that they were being, there was surveillance being practiced on them. So there was no freedom at all. The position under the Sirisena government has definitely changed in regard to the matter that I talked about. But that does not mean that everything is okay. We have many matters yet to be attended to. Some lands have been released, both in the north and the east. In the east, the land that was released in Sampur almost went completely out of our hand. We were able to stop it at the very last moment, and now the people are being resettled on their lands. In Jaffna, in Varikamam, in other places, some lands have been released, but the process has been slow. We would like the process to move much faster and for people to be resettled, to be provided housing. I remember when the war was over, I went to about 30 villages in Lavanni with my colleagues in Parliament, and we prepared a report in regard to the situation prevalent. And I met President Rajapaksa, gave him a copy of that report, and asked him to provide people with housing. His response was, where do I go for the money? I have no money to provide houses. When we mentioned this to the Indian Prime Minister, the Indian Prime Minister took a decision that 50,000 houses would be given to the people in the north primarily. So that is the difference between the two governments. Today we don't have the white man culture. People are free. People are moving around. I agree that people have not been provided with housing to the extent required. People have not been provided with livelihood opportunities. People People have lost all their agricultural equipment, all their fishing equipment. Many things have got to be done. And we are pressing the government as much as we can. The government is engaged in a process to frame a new constitution. We hope that they will be successful. We want to work towards framing a new constitution in which there will be constitutional arrangements for the sharing of the sovereignty of people and for the political aspirations of the Tamil people, the Tamil-speaking people, to be addressed. So things are happening, but not happening fast enough. Probably one of the reasons for the process being slow is the opposition being mounted by the Rajapaksa loyalists. But we have to keep the process going. We have to try and push the government to move forwards and move forwards faster than now. Yes.
As it pertains to the withdrawing the Sri Lankan military from occupying land in predominantly Tamil-populated areas, why do you believe it's taking this long for that to happen?
Well, I must say that in my view, there are sections in the military and sections in the bureaucracy who don't quite agree with the thinking of the government, who I think would like to obstruct and prevent the government implementing its policies. The government also wants to do these things, but they want to be cautious in the way they are done, because there are people who carry out the propaganda that when the land is released to the Tamil people and when the military is withdrawn, national security is in danger, and that the Sri Lanka government is engaged in activity which is causing an impairment of national security. I'm not saying that for this reason the Sri Lanka government can refrain from doing what it has to do, but this is the ground situation. So while we are unhappy with the extent of what has happened, we must also appreciate that something has happened and that there is an effort to move in the right direction. There is a willingness on the part of the government. The government must get its act together and move forward.
You're certain that everybody who is in any form of detention is known to the government?
The 292 in detention are known to the government.
And that's all?
That's all.
No others?
No one is.
The problem is that we have specific cases in which people are recorded as having surrendered. They were seen in detention 1 year on, but they cannot now be seen. You're saying they're dead. I mean, if they've not come home and they're not...
They are most probably dead.
In early 2016, Ranil Wickramasinghe asserted that any missing persons are most probably dead and are not being held in detention centers. What is your response to his statement?
Well, I cannot say, but the number of missing persons is quite large. Almost 20,000 or above that. That would be the number of complaints made to the various commissions that have inquired into this matter. I don't think that number of persons are being kept in concealment in some place or places. But the fact of the matter is, there must be a proper investigation before there can be any conclusion in regard to that matter. But it's also necessary, in the context of the immense suffering and the immense trauma caused to the families of these people, that there must be some acceptable closure of this whole issue by a proper investigation by the truth being ascertained, by justice being done to the people grieved, by providing the people with reparation and ensuring non-recurrence. So I think I do not want to comment on Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe's statement. That's his opinion. But as far as the victims are concerned, the victims would want the matter to be investigated, because some families have handed over their kids and kin to security personnel personally. They would like to know what happened to them. Some people were arrested in the presence of family members. They saw them being arrested. They saw them being taken away. So they would like to know what happened to them. You can't merely close the chapter by saying those people are probably dead. You have to go inquire into it, ascertain the truth in regard to what happened, and on the basis of truth, ensure that justice is done, that adequate reparation is provided, there is also assurance of non-recurrence, and thereby bring this whole issue to a closure.
In March of 2016, Sri Lanka's foreign minister told Parliament that the government was in the process of repealing the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Since the foreign minister's announcement, have there been any key signs of progress in repealing the Prevention of Terrorism Act?
The Prevention of Terrorism Act has not been repealed. There was a commitment made by the Sri Lankan government and the foreign minister at the UN Human Rights Sessions in September-October 2015 that the Prevention of Terrorism Act would be repealed. In fact, I have raised this in Parliament more than once, and we have insisted that the Act must be repealed. We have particularly insisted that persons who have been taken into custody and are yet being held in custody under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, that even persons who have been convicted under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, some of them they were taken into custody under the Prevention of Terrorism Act have not yet been charged. We have asked that all these persons should be released, because the Prevention of Terrorism Act is accepted as being a draconian law given by the government. And the government has assured the international community that the Act will be repealed and replaced by a law in keeping with international norms and standards. We regret that has not happened so far. We are pressing for it. I expect movement in that matter. Let's hope that the government will not delay the matter any further. And we will ensure we are constantly raising the matter in Parliament and speaking about it. We hope that very soon that Act will be repealed.
The Sri Lankan government favored a hybrid justice mechanism with international involvement to investigate human rights abuses committed during the ethnic conflict. But what progress do you believe President Sirisena has made as it pertains to cooperating with the UN and allowing a comprehensive investigation into war crimes and human rights violations to take place?
There is no judicial process yet set up. The resolution adopted at the UN Human Rights Council in September-October last year in regard to setting up a hybrid judicial process has not been implemented. There have been some statements in Sri Lanka that the judicial process, the judges in particular, would not be foreigners, though the resolution states that there will be Commonwealth judges and other foreign personnel, lawyers, both defending and prosecuting, and also investigators. This matter has been referred to when the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights made an oral statement just a couple of days ago at the most recent session of the Human Rights Council, where the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights called upon the Sri Lankan government to adhere with the resolution adopted, co-sponsored by the Sri Lankan government at the sessions last year. And I'm extremely happy that many countries the world over affirmed that request of the High Commissioner that the judicial process must conform to the requirements of the resolution adopted last year. The Sri Lankan government has set up a task force to look into this question, consult civil society and public opinion, and assist them in regard to this process. I think some work is being done. These are matters that need to be done, but the position in the country is that those opposed to the present government, particularly some members of the former government, think that there should be no foreign involvement in the judicial process, and that such foreign involvement would be harmful to the country. So there is a difficulty, but that difficulty must be overcome. The resolution needs to be implemented. Our consistent position has been that it's a resolution co-sponsored by the Sri Lankan government. More than 10 months have passed since the resolution was adopted. There has been sufficient time, and we want to see action in that regard.
Do you personally support the hybrid justice mechanism as a suitable option? For example, certain criticisms are that the language around the mechanism is so vague that it gives the government of Sri Lanka a lot of freedom to design the mechanism in such a way as to make the involvement of the international community minimal. In addition, Sri Lanka could appoint international lawyers of ill repute who would perform no other role than to provide cover for an otherwise domestic process.
Well, the fact of the matter is that this issue has come up because the Sri Lankan judiciary has lost its reputation for independence and impartiality. It is no secret that the former government interfered with the functioning of the judiciary. In fact, they even impeached a former Chief Justice, Justice Chirane Bandaranayake, for the reason that she wouldn't comply with some request made by the Sri Lankan government. They appointed their students to the judiciary. So in that context, in that background, the persons who need to be convinced of the credibility of any judicial mechanism are the victims and their families. They are the aggrieved people. In that context, the local judiciary cannot be trusted upon by these victims and their families. And it's in that context that the issue of involvement of foreign judges in the process was highlighted. So if the victims are to be convinced of the credibility of the process and such conviction on their part can lead to reconciliation and harmony, the government needs to do something about it. The government needs to find ways and means of implementing the resolution it has co-sponsored and which is adopted by the UN Human Rights Council. The language may not be strong, but I think the language is clear enough to emphasize the point that the government accepts the need for foreign judges to ensure the credibility of the process.
A UN panel said the Sri Lankan government deliberately shelled civilians. Some were executed, others disappeared. The investigators delivered a series of hard-hitting assessments. Allegations of serious human rights abuses were credible, it says, and if proven, they would amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. The conduct of the war represented a grave assault on the entire regime of international law, they wrote. In the final months of the conflict, the Sri Lankan military advanced rapidly into the north. As the Tamil Tigers retreated, Tamil civilians were forced to move with them. A series of safe areas, or no-fire zones, were set up, but the Sri Lankan government repeatedly shelled them. Their long-range guns targeted food supplies and hospitals as well. The panel said this campaign constituted persecution. The report says the government shelled 3 no-fire zones, zones where it encouraged the civilian population to concentrate. The government systematically shelled hospitals on the front lines. All hospitals in the region were hit, it says. The Tamil Tigers, also known as the LTTE, is also accused of committing war crimes. As the Sri Lankan military advanced, civilians were used as human shields. The panel found that the LTTE held civilians as hostages, using their presence as a strategic human buffer between them and the Sri Lankan army. Early in 2009, the LTTE started point-blank shooting of civilians who attempted to escape the conflict zone. What happened in the final months of the war is subject to intense scrutiny.
But you do also realize that a credible investigation would also reveal human rights abuses and war crimes committed on the part of the LTTE, such as the LTTE's use of civilians as human shields, and this could lead to prosecutions of members of the Tamil community. Would you be willing to accept that responsibility?
Well, our position is that if war crimes have been committed, and if they have been committed by both sides, and the reports of the international investigations thus far, whether it be the commission appointed by the UN Secretary General, the committee of experts appointed by him, 3 of them, or whether it be the inquiries conducted by the inquiries and investigations conducted by the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, their reports are that war crimes were committed, that there was a violation of human rights laws and international humanitarian laws. So, and that they were committed by both sides. So, I mean, one cannot run away from it. One must face it. And those who have been guilty of such war crimes will have to face an inevitable process. That is something that no one can avoid.
And more importantly, there is no longer a demand for a separate state. The demand for a separate state was given up even before the war came to an end. The Tamil people have had successive elections, parliamentary, provincial and local authority elections after 1977 clearly confirmed and democratically endorsed that definite policy. And it is in this background that there is no longer a demand for a separate state. And it is also in this background that we are seeking to resolve the national issue within the framework of a united and undivided and indivisible Sri Lanka. It is within this framework that we are looking at a new constitution that will also resolve the national question.
You have repeatedly asserted, even within Parliament, that the Sri Lankan Tamils have given up their fight for a separate state and the ethnic problem will be resolved through a united and indivisible Sri Lanka. Does this mean that you do not approve of and thus condemn the actions of Tamil diaspora organizations such as the TGTE when they are repeatedly calling for a UN referendum within predominantly Tamil populated areas to determine whether there should be a separate state?
Well, you see, I respect diversity of views, and I think every Sri Lankan Tamils in particular, have long suffered, whether they live in this country or live abroad. People left this country because they felt they could no longer live in this country. They are entitled to express their opinion, and their opinion must be respected, and their opinion must be taken into consideration in whatever decision we make. But after the 1983 riots and the acceptance of the good office of India by the Sri Lankan government and the long negotiations that took place between the Sri Lankan government and under Indian auspices with the Tamil political leadership, there was the Indo-Sri Lanka Agreement in 1987, which recognized certain definite positions that Sri Lanka was inhabited by different people, the Sinhalese, the Tamils, the Muslims, the Burghers, and so on. Each one of them had a distinct identity which had to be preserved and nurtured. That the Tamil-speaking people have historically inhabited the northern and eastern provinces, and that they are entitled to have the northern and eastern provinces as one unit of devolution. The acceptance of these features resulted in the 13th Amendment being enacted by Parliament, which of course was based upon negotiations that had taken place earlier in 1986 between the Sri Lankan government and the Tamil political leadership. The 13th Amendment was no solution to the problem, but it was the beginning, and that was the time that we felt that since we had got at least provincial councils, and in the case of the Tamil-speaking areas, a merged Northeast Provincial Council, we should take that process forward. And during certain governments after that period, particularly during the time of President Chandrika Bandaranaike, there was progress in that front. Unfortunately, she did not have a two-thirds majority in Parliament and could not implement what she wanted to do. Her 2000 proposals were not the best, but were certainly much better than what we've ever had before, and certainly workable. So we decided that we will seek a solution within the framework of a united, undivided country, but that solution must be based on certain principles, on the basis of a shared sovereignty, on the basis of maximum devolution of power, on the basis of a capacity to muster the resources necessary to exercise that power, and so as to ensure that that is not power that can be interfered with either by the centre or by the centre's agents like the governor, or by public security being proclaimed and a state of emergency being declared. It must be reasonable, it must be workable, it also must be durable. So, in order to take this forward, we had to take certain definite positions, and we are endeavouring to take this forward. And given the fact that the present government has set up a constitutional assembly, converted parliament into a constitutional assembly, and is Gopal and is endeavouring to frame a new constitution, which amongst other matters would also include a political solution that would be acceptable to all the people in Sri Lanka, including the Tamil people and the Tamil-speaking people. So we are working on that. We can't have our feet in two boats. We have got to be consistent with our position if we are to take it forward. We have got to correct conviction amongst the singular people that we are prepared to give up our demand for a separate state if there is an acceptable political solution. That does not mean that we will sacrifice the interests of our people. Certainly not. So these are the circumstances under which we are working. And I'm sure that my friends in the diaspora and persons who disagree with us, who may have different views, just as I'm prepared to understand their views, they should also be able to understand our views, and eventually we are all working for the same goal, that is for the emancipation of our people, and to ensure that our people have the freedom to live in this country as equal citizens based on justice.
We are a multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious society. Thus, when we speak of nation building, what we are discussing is the rebuilding of this country with all its differences and diversities. We are not assuming that there is already a Sri Lankan nation which needs to be built. On the other hand, we have a country common to various nations within it, and we are proceeding to discuss ways and means of building this country fractured at this moment. So I use the phrase nation building in the sense of rebuilding this fractured country. Nation building, like the construction of any complex building, requires proper planning.
You had mentioned the Indo-Lanka Accords. To what extent has the Northern Provincial Council been effective in implementing legislation to improve the livelihood of the citizens living in the Northern Province?
The people in the people who govern the Northern Province represent the Chief Minister, the Board of Ministers, and the Provincial Council have been doing their best. But very unfortunately, the 13th Amendment is not a process, is not a law through which political power can be exercised to a degree sufficient to be able to fulfill the aspirations of all your people, all our people. It's a difficult task. They are doing their best. And we are, of course, contemplating changes in the Constitution that will make the sharing of power more effective and more meaningful and more purposeful, so that our people will, in future, at least in the future, after the new Constitution is framed, they will be able to have a better life.
Late last year, it was reported that there were disputes between the Northern Provincial Council Chief Minister, Mr. Wigneswaran, and yourself regarding who should head the leadership of the TNA. What is your current relationship like with the Chief Minister?
There was never any dispute between me and the Chief Minister. That was a mistaken belief. We may have had different shades of opinion on certain issues, But it never became a dispute. It never became a conflict. I met him just 2 days ago over some problem in the north. We meet as and when necessary. I don't poke my finger into the administration of the Northern Provincial Council. I think the Chief Minister has been elected by the people to perform that task. And I think our relationship is quite cordial, quite normal. Nothing to get alarmed about.
In November of 2015, you had met with Samantha Power, the United States ambassador to the United Nations. Can you talk about what that meeting was about and what was accomplished during that meeting?
Well, we discuss when we meet diplomats and ambassadors and leaders from other countries. We discuss everything. We discuss the current situation, the human rights situation, the situation pertaining to the lives of our people, land, military occupation, military engaged in commercial activity, causing difficulties to the economic recovery and progress of our people, question of refugees, question of missing persons, various issues we discussed, question of a political solution and a constitutional process. Generally, our discussions with diplomats, ambassadors, leaders of other countries are complete. Our discussions are generally quite full and cover every aspect of the current issues. That would be the brief summary of what we discussed with Ambassador Samantha Power.
The TNA delegation led by you and the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress delegation led by Rauf Hakim met in Colombo on December 30th, 2015 for preliminary talks on power sharing agreements. Can you talk about what progress has been made as it pertains to coming to an agreement on power sharing since the initial preliminary talks?
Well, the talks between us and the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress is not largely about Sri Lanka Muslim Congress. It's not largely about power sharing, as primarily about the unit of devolution. I think they would like to leave power sharing to us because we are much clearer. We have been much more consistent, and our position has been very clearly enunciated from the time of the SJB Chilwanagam, commencing in the late 40s and the early 50s in regard to power sharing. But we have to come to an agreement in regard to the units of devolution, because we have got to ensure that the Tamil people and the Muslim people are satisfied with the demarcation of the units of devolution. We want to ensure that the Sinhalese people living in our areas have justice and that they are able to live as equal citizens. So the discussions have been primarily regarding those matters. The North and East were merged under the Indo-Sri Lanka Agreement and formed one unit of devolution. Very unfortunately, on the basis of a fundamental rights application, filed in the Supreme Court 18 years after the merger, a judgment delivered by the then Chief Justice has suspended that merger on the basis that there was a procedural irregularity in regard to the manner of the merger. We don't accept that judgment, and we are firmly of the view that the matter needs to be revisited. And our discussions with the Muslim Congress are primarily in regard to that issue. We have not made much progress, but the talks have just started.
SLMC General Secretary Hassan Ali, I believe shortly after the first talks, stated that the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress, SLMC, will submit a proposal to the Constitutional Assembly for a unit of devolution for the Muslims of the North and East, based on party's founder leader Ashraf's demand, a unit of devolution encompassing the non-contiguous geographic area of domicile of the Muslims of the two provinces, with power-sharing arrangements on par with the Tamil community. That was the SLMC's demand from the inception. So as Mr. Sampanthan, as the leader of the TNA, how do you respond to the party's founder's demand of non-contiguous geographic areas for the Muslims? Do you believe that it is viable, and would you support it?
There has been no definite proposal put forward by the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress thus far. No such definite proposal has come forward from the Muslim Congress. But of course there have been views expressed by political leaders and by members of civil society within the Muslim community.
But would you support? Would you support?
In regard to various arrangements, I can't answer that question immediately. Every proposal made by everyone will be under our serious consideration. We have got to ensure that the ultimate arrangement is a workable arrangement. There are many models in the world, in many countries, where there have been arrangements made in regard to such matters. So we have to make a decision on this question as we go along. And we will do that to the best of our ability to ensure that justice is done to everyone.
What provisions, in your view, should be implemented within Sri Lanka's constitution to give a greater political voice to the ethnic minority groups in Sri Lanka?
There must be sharing of power on the basis of a shared sovereignty. The subjects assigned to regions or provinces must be such as to fulfill the political, economic, social and cultural aspirations of the Tamil people and the Tamil-speaking people. It must be on the basis of subsidiarity, that everything which can be addressed at a lower level or at the local level must be so addressed, which would mean that there must be very substantial devolution of power, very substantial sharing of power, apart from powers which need to be kept at the center in order to ensure the country's unity and territorial integrity, such as defense, foreign affairs, currency, immigration, emigration, citizenship, maybe other issues, communication, national transport, major ports, major harbors. Apart from these, everything else should be devolved, which has an impact on the lives of our people, lives of people who live in the regions and territories. All power must be dissolved. There must be sufficient financial resources, domestic and foreign loans, domestic and foreign grants, foreign investment, capacity to raise revenue through taxation, to ensure that we are able to exercise these powers. We must ensure that there is no interference with the exercise of these powers, either by the center or by any agent of the center like the governor. We must ensure that these powers can be exercised freely and without interference to a state of emergency or the Public Security Act. So these are matters that we are concerned about and which we will work around to ensure that the solution is reasonable, adequate, workable and durable.